for our 13 fallen service members. How's that? And I'd like to start the prayer off tonight by a prayer for them. So please join me.
Hold on one second, Kenny, please. Excuse me.
Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight with sadness in our hearts, and we ask you to let the young people know that have just lost their lives that we are thinking about them, that their lives that they gave are in our hearts tonight. We ask you to hold Sergeant Johanny Rosario Picardo, United States Marine Corps. Hold her in your arms. Sergeant Nicole G., United States Marine Corps. Hold her in your heart. Staff Sergeant Darren Hoover, United States Marine Corps. Corporal Hunter Lopez. Corporal Dagan Page. Corporal Humberto Sanchez. Lance Corporal David Espinoza. Lance Corporal Jared Schmidt. Lance Corporal Riley McCullum. Lance Corporal Dylan Marola. Lance Corporal Kareem Nakui. Navy Corpsman Maxton Sobiak. And Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Noss. Hold those young people in your arms and caress them and let them know that we think about them, that we care about them, and we realize the sacrifice that they made, and also comfort their families so that they may know the rest of the nation is behind them and shares in their grief. Also, the families of the 2,467 deaths that we had in Afghanistan. Let them know that their lives were not given in vain, that our country still cares. Then the greater than 20,000 wounded that came back with limbs torn, feet gone, arms and legs, hands, the wounds that they suffered. Comfort them and comfort their families. Let them know that we care. Over 350 contractors were killed, some Americans, some Afghanis. Their families need to be comforted as well. Join us as we think about them, as we care about them. For all those young people, the wives, mothers, sisters, brothers, fathers, husbands that either lost their lives or were wounded. Some have PTSD. Some are thinking about suicide. Comfort them tonight, Heavenly Father, and let them know that we care about them. Hold them in your heart and hold them with your miraculous hands, that they know that we in this country are grateful for them, and we hold them in our hearts as well. In your name we pray. Amen.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. You may now be seated. Okay, I would like to now recognize our guest speaker, who's going to be speaking on the flood prevention bond referendum, our very own Councilman John Moss.
I'm going to introduce the city staff because they're going to be presenting an 8-minute video. But about 5 years ago, we were all here saying what? Drains, not trains. And so tonight we're going to be talking about drainage. But I thought a good way to set this off is a well-produced video. It's 8 minutes long. It kind of captures contextually in a visual format what we are going to address with our $567 million bond referendum. So Valerie, if you're out there and you can just hit the push button, we'll start with the video.
I have the video here.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah.
Are you pushing it or is she?
I am.
Oh, you're pushing it?
Yeah.
Well, in that case,
She sent it to us.
oh, very good. There you go. Push.
Oh.
Virginia's largest city by population is battling a chronic water crisis. Not too little water, like some places, but too much. Virginia Beach faces the greatest risk for major flooding of any metro area on the East Coast because of more frequent and more destructive storms, along with rising sea levels. Existing stormwater infrastructure just can't keep up with it all. The flooding affects everyone citywide, turning Virginia Beach roads into streams, creating dangerous conditions for drivers, sometimes cutting off whole neighborhoods. Even on sunny days, high winds are known to trigger rising water. Small rainstorms often create minor flooding, but bigger storms bring so much water that they damage our homes, cars, and businesses. This recurrent flooding also threatens the health of the Virginia Beach economy. More than 15,000 civilian employees work at military bases here. Millions of tourists flock to our beaches and attractions every year. And major employers like Geico, Centerra, and Steel gravitate here, enjoying the low cost of doing business in Virginia Beach. But they all have one thing in common: a need for passable roads and a community safe from floods. FEMA analysis projects that up to 1 in every 10 buildings in Virginia Beach is currently at risk of damage if a large storm hit today. That number climbs to 1 in 4 when combined with the sea level rise of 1.5 feet. And the damage risk jumps to 2 out of every 3 homes and other buildings if the sea level rises 3 feet. Virginia Beach is tackling flooding head on. The city is already investing more money in stormwater projects than it invests in any other area. City engineers say recently completed projects show significant improvements. To keep ahead of this threat, the City of Virginia Beach wants to accelerate and expand work to address additional flood challenges. A city council authorized referendum on flood protection for voters to consider is on the November ballot. It's an aggressive, multi-generational flood protection program to speed up existing flood and stormwater controls while adding new projects as well. City leaders believe the proposed flood protection program will have a ripple effect that safeguards homes, protects businesses, and responsibly addresses stormwater issues for generations to come. Voters will decide on November 2nd whether the city can issue what's called general obligation bonds for up to 5.
It stopped.
You know that. Roll it forward, try to forward a little bit now. Won't turn. Nope.
Is it in your email?
No, it's on the thumb drive.
Yeah, no, I downloaded the thumb drive.
No, he's got the
No.
number.
You want to work that out, I can just
Yeah.
start, because I can fill in some of that
That's what
detail.
you're doing off.
There's nothing worse than having a long.
No, I just tried downloading it here.
Oh.
So,
Should be able to go back to the play button. Oh, you lost your source. Ooh, that doesn't work.
want to go ahead, just go. Well,
We're
what I was
loading
gonna
the
say, it's a $567 million bond referendum, and depending upon interest rates and the term by which we issue the debt, it'll be somewhere between 5 and 7 cents to finance the $567 million. So that's what it was gonna tell you. So that's part. But this isn't working, so just like always, I'm always prepared. But I do want to let, but I do want to let you know that the city manager is observing, as is our budget director. We have the director of public works who's here as a person, and he will be the person I turn to when you get into the niches of the issue. But I want to tell you that if those of you around here at the time of Lake Gaston, I don't know how many people were here when we couldn't use water and all sorts of things. Well, this particular threat, the flooding threat, is equal to the water threat that we had when we had a bond referendum in 1989 for $200 million. But the threat is just as dangerous to the city going forward as was the lack of water in 1989. And as many people recall, that was a pretty big project, but if you escalate 1989 to 2021, that would be about $450 million. So really, when you look at the dollar value, it is big, but in the scheme of things, we have been here before with major community challenges, and the community has responded. And I'm here today to tell you why it's important for us as a community, thinking about the long run, to address this threat. I often call it an existential threat. And people say, well, what does that mean? That means if the event that you're trying to prevent happens, life as you fundamentally know it will have changed. And your time to recover, it will never be the same. So if you think about New Orleans, you think about the Gulf Coast, where all the stuff moved north of I-10, it will fundamentally change our community, and it will fundamentally change people's financial security, often not thought about. So the risk is real. I know many people in here are military folks who know about threats. Well, how did we all of a sudden have this big threat? Well, it didn't sneak up on us, that's for certain, but the threat's enabled by really rising sea level, both by warming oceans. Warmer the water, the bigger the volume. Land ice, because Arctic ice that's in the water, if it melts, doesn't make anything rise up. We all know that from the glass we have at home. Other thing is the rising temperature, as I mentioned, changing weather patterns. There is no doubt we are getting more frequent and more intense storms. What most people don't realize, that anything built in our city before 1980 is really built to either a 1 or a 2 year rainfall event standard. So even when that stuff works perfectly, it underperformed relative to people's expectation. So anybody who, I've listened to NPR by way here today, and they were talking about the flooding in New Jersey, and they were mentioning how well the coastline performed because of all the work they did, but the source of the flooding was what? The streets and the inside couldn't handle the stormwater. And now those communities have fundamental recovery, fundamental costs. And what I'm really telling you, when you think about, we have a $67 billion tax base, we're talking about 1% of that to invest in keeping that dry. Now, another point that people don't know or haven't thought about is, if we were to get a 100-year rain event, and you can get more than one in a single year, or you can get none for 20 years. But if we were to have one, 63% of the city or 160 square miles of our 257 land miles would flood. Now, on the current course that we are on, which is don't raise any taxes, don't borrow any additional money over what's been programmed, and gradually increase the stormwater fee, we can accomplish in 40 years what we can accomplish in 10 years. And that's based on the modeling and the pace we're going. So you have to ask yourself is, when you look at the cost, the value proposition, do you want to have a risk over 40 years? Or would you like to say you're gradually making that risk go away during phase 1 and 10? When you look at the cost, it's somewhere between, on a $200,000 home, it's about $8.33. If you're a $500,000 home, it's going to be about $23 or more. So it's going to vary on the appreciated value of your home. But if you think about what you're going to be paying for flood insurance going forward, coming this October, FEMA will be imposing a new flood criteria, how they assess. You'll be paying on not just how close you are to water, the value of your house. And Congress has dictated that FEMA's flood rates must be actuarially sound at the end of a 5-year period. So you're going to be seeing 20-25% annual increases. And when we get done with these projects, we're going to be moving a substantial part of our land into the preferred risk premium. So if you're out there with, I don't know how many, raise your hand if you have to carry mortgage insurance with your, flood insurance with your mortgage. Does anyone? Well, you're going to see those increases. And when they do the maps, as we have experiences, more land is going to end up being in those floods, because they're flying drones over, they're going to look at experience, and land that people say, oh, I'm dry now. Well, you won't probably maybe not be dry in 10 years because nature is indifferent to our lack of action. The sea level is going to rise over that time frame. And what does that do at high tide? It fills up all our drain pipes with water, which largely explained the big flooding that we had in Princess Anne Plaza and Windsor Woods and the lakes, is because the tide was high, came in and filled up the 2 lakes, came up into the pipes, and then the water couldn't empty, plus the canals hadn't been properly maintained. That added to it. But even absent, if we had all our legacy systems in perfect condition, those areas would have still had flooding, because our system is not designed to deal with the current and forecasted intense rain events. So there's a real threat there. And I'd be irresponsible if I just said, oh, well, people don't want to pay higher taxes, so I just won't tell them they're at risk. Well, this bond referendum, this council saying, we've assessed it. We've done the Dewberry study. We've had the state just completed their study talking about how exposed we are, because we have subsidence, that's part of it. And we have the rising thing. So our system is being degraded as we speak on an annual basis. So you might say, oh, I don't flood now. Well, by the time your property floods, it's too late for prevention. Now you're doing what? Recovery plus prevention, which is what happened in Houston. Everybody remembers how Houston flooded? Well, right after they flooded, they passed this $2 billion bond referendum. But that didn't do